The fluorescent hum of the office lights had become the soundtrack to my life, a low, grating thrum that vibrated in my teeth. Another Tuesday, another stack of invoices waiting to be reconciled. Another day spent watching the clock tick from 1 minute to the next, each second a tiny, invisible erosion of my ambition. My desk, a beige island in a sea of identical beige islands, offered a panoramic view of the cubicle farm, a landscape of hunched shoulders and flickering screens. I pushed my glasses up my nose, my fingers stained with cheap ink, and sighed. This wasn't the fresh start I'd promised myself after college. This was a slow, agonizing fade to gray. Then the email arrived. Not from a client, not from a colleague, but from a solicitor. A name I didn't recognize. A subject line that made me blink. Estate of Eleanor Vance. My great-aunt. I hadn't seen her since I was a child. A fleeting memory of a sharp-eyed woman who smelled of lavender and old paper. She'd always been an enigma, a distant eccentric living in a place I only knew as up north. He was, to me, more concept than person. The email was curt, formal. My great-aunt had passed. I was her sole living relative, and I had inherited Blackwood House. The name itself felt like a whisper of something ancient, something heavy. Blackwood House. I pulled up satellite images, my browser suddenly feeling inadequate for the scale of what I was seeing. A sprawling, Gothic revival manor, swallowed by dense forest, isolated by miles of winding, unpaved road. It looked less like a home and more like a fortress, crumbling at the edges, its windows' dark eyes staring out from beneath heavy, ivy-choked brows. The solicitor had mentioned significant deferred maintenance and a rather remote location. He'd sounded almost apologetic, as if trying to dissuade me. But as I stared at the digital ghost of the house, a prickle of something. Not excitement, not exactly, but a deep, unfamiliar pull began to stir in my chest. Anything had to be better than the fluorescent hum. The journey had been long. The last hour, a descent into a tunnel of trees, their branches interlacing overhead, blocking out the afternoon sun. The air grew cooler, heavier as I approached. Blackwood House loomed, even larger and more imposing than its satellite image suggested. The gray stone was stained with centuries of weather, the slate roof sagged in places, and the overgrown gardens clawed at the walls like skeletal fingers. A faint, earthy smell, like damp soil and decaying leaves, hung in the air. I killed the engine. My breath plumed in the cool air, even though it was only late autumn. This place felt watched. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of weak light filtering through a high, grimy window. The air inside was thick, stagnant, carrying the scent of mildew, old wood, and something else I couldn't quite place. A faint metallic tang, like rust, or perhaps something older, deeper. My footsteps echoed on the checkered marble floor as I stepped inside. The foyer alone was larger than my entire apartment. Grand, sweeping staircase, walls adorned with faded tapestries depicting hunting scenes I could barely discern in the gloom. Everything was draped in white sheets, ghostly shrouds over unseen furniture, creating a landscape of silent, sleeping giants. I started my exploration methodically, pushing open doors, peeling back covers. I told myself it was just an old house, full of drafts. Down a narrow, unlit corridor off the kitchen, I found a heavy, unvarnished door. It wasn't draped like the others, and a faint, rhythmic sound pulsed from behind it. Curiosity, or perhaps a stubborn refusal to be unnerved, tugged me forward. I pushed the door open. It was the laundry room with humming machines. Not just one, but a row of massive industrial-grade washers and dryers, their metallic bodies dull with age. And two of them, ancient behemoths of steel and enamel, were humming. A deep, resonant thrum that vibrated through the floorboards. The air in here was surprisingly warm, thick with the smell of old detergent and hot metal, a stark contrast to the rest of the house. I touched the side of one humming machine. It was faintly warm. It made no sense. Why were they on? Who had left them like this? I stood there for a long moment, listening to the impossible hum, a growing knot of unease tightening in my stomach. This was something else. As I backed out of the laundry room, the humming seemed to follow me, a low vibration in the soles of my shoes. I shut the door, cutting off the sound, but not the feeling. My heart thumped a little faster now, a nervous drum against my ribs. I needed to find the fuse box or the main power switch and cut everything. I continued my exploration, trying to shake off the peculiar incident. Up the grand staircase I went, the wood groaning beneath my weight. In what I assumed was a study, a massive desk stood in the center of the room, uncovered, as if someone had just stepped away. On its surface, beneath a thin film of dust, lay a single leather-bound journal. Its cover was blank, save for a single intricately carved symbol, a series of interlocking circles and lines that seemed to writhe and coil into themselves. It wasn't a symbol I recognized from any history book or art class. It felt foreign, ancient. My great-aunt wasn't just eccentric. He was collecting something, researching something. The low hum of the laundry machines, now distant, still echoed in my mind. Blackwood House wasn't just a fresh start. It was a puzzle, and I had just found the first, most peculiar piece. I'd been at the firm for 5 years, pushing paper, watching the gray walls close in, feeling the slow drain of ambition. My life was a spreadsheet, organized and utterly lifeless. Then the letter arrived, thick, cream-colored stock, sealed with a wax impression of a raven. My great-aunt Alara had passed. I hadn't seen her since I was a child, a dim memory of a stern woman in a dark dress, surrounded by shadows and the scent of old books. He was the family eccentric, the one everyone whispered about, the one who lived in a house so remote it might as well have been on another planet. Blackwood House. The letter informed me I was her sole heir. Everything. The house, its contents, the sprawling, overgrown grounds. My first thought, honestly, wasn't grief. It was freedom. A chance to escape the cubicle, the fluorescent hum, the endless, soul-crushing sameness. So I quit, just like that. The manager, a man whose face seemed permanently etched with the lines of mild disappointment, just blinked at me. "Cole, are you sure about this?" he'd asked, as if I were contemplating jumping off a bridge, not merely trading a life of beige for a life of... Well, I didn't know what, but it had to be better. The drive to Blackwood House took longer than I expected, winding through increasingly dense forests, the asphalt giving way to a gravel track that seemed to swallow my tires whole. The GPS signal died miles back, leaving me to navigate by instinct and the vague directions scrawled on the back of the wheel. When the house finally appeared through a break in the trees, it was exactly as I remembered. Enormous, gothic, and undeniably imposing. Ivy, thick as a man's arm, snaked up the walls, clutching at the windows like skeletal fingers. A scent hung heavy, a mix of damp earth, decaying leaves, and something else I couldn't quite place, something metallic and ancient. The front door, a heavy oak slab studded with tarnished iron, groaned open with a sound like a dying animal. Inside, the air was still, thick with dust motes dancing in the shafts of light that pierced the grimy windows. The silence was profound, broken only by the creak of the floorboards under my boots and the distant, almost imperceptible whisper of the wind through broken panes. I spent the first few days just exploring, trying to wrap my head around the sheer scale of the place. Room after room, filled with furniture draped in white sheets like forgotten ghosts. Endless corridors lined with portraits whose eyes seemed to follow me. It was a museum of a life I knew nothing about. The dust was everywhere, a fine gray powder that coated every surface, a testament to years of neglect. On my third evening, I decided to tackle the practicalities. My clothes, still packed in a duffel bag, were getting stale. After a bit of searching, guided by a faint metallic smell that grew stronger with each turn, I located the laundry room with humming machines. It was in the basement, a surprisingly modern addition in a house otherwise trapped in the past. 2 heavy-duty washing machines and a dryer sat against a concrete wall, their surfaces gleaming under a single bare bulb. Unlike the rest of the house, this room felt functional. Almost too functional. I tossed my clothes into one of the washers, poured in some detergent I'd bought from the closest town, and pressed the start button. The machine rumbled to life, a deep mechanical groan that quickly settled into a steady rhythmic slosh. The dryer, even when off, seemed to emit a low, continuous thrum, a vibration that I felt more than heard, resonating through the concrete floor. That's when I heard it. A sound, faint, like dry leaves skittering across a stone floor, but it wasn't coming from outside. It was inside the room, right behind the washing machine. I frowned, pushing off the wall. The hum of the machines filled the space, a dull roar that made it hard to pinpoint anything else. But then it came again, clearer this time, a distinct clink, like something small and metallic had dropped onto the concrete. My eyes darted to the space between the 2 washing machines, a narrow gap where the sound had originated. Nothing. I strained my ears, listening over the washing machines churning. The dryer's low thrum seemed to intensify, vibrating up my legs. It was so soft, so fleeting, I almost dismissed it as the rush of water in the pipes or the friction of the machine's gears. But it wasn't mechanical. It was breathy, dry, like air escaping from a forgotten place. It sounded like a single syllable, drawn out, almost a sigh. Not words, not yet, just a sound, barely there, but undeniably there. After all, I'd been living a life of fluorescent lights and spreadsheets. My senses were probably just overstimulated. I took a slow, deliberate breath, trying to calm the sudden tremor in my hands. Just the house, I muttered aloud, my voice sounding thin and weak in the cavernous basement. Old house settling. I walked over to the washing machine, peering behind it, then between the 2. Just dust bunnies and a stray, rusty screw. I even checked the floor where I thought I'd heard the clink. Empty. But as I straightened up, a small ornamental key, one I hadn't noticed before, lay on top of the dryer, right beside my hand. It was old, brass, with an intricate design on its head, completely out of place in this utilitarian room. I hadn't put it there. I hadn't seen it there a minute ago. I picked it up, the metal surprisingly warm against my palm. My rational mind screamed that it must have been there all along, overlooked. Perhaps it had fallen from a shelf. But there were no shelves. This was something else. Here, at Blackwood House, the soundtrack was different. It was the creak of settling timber, the soft sigh of the wind through broken panes, the distant, almost imperceptible groan of a house too old and too tired to hold its breath any longer. I'd traded stacks of invoices for stacks of dust, the tick of a clock for the endless, echoing silence. Home. But the house resisted. Every cleaned surface seemed to attract more grime. Every opened window seemed to draw in a colder, heavier air. The study was a chaotic testament to a life lived on the fringes of understanding. Books on folklore, ancient history, and forgotten languages spilled from shelves. Dried herbs hung in brittle bundles from the ceiling. A heavy oak desk dominated the room, its surface cluttered with ink-stained parchments, tarnished silver trinkets, and what looked like a collection of fossilized teeth. I ran a hand over the cool, smooth surface of the desk, a shiver tracing my spine. This wasn't just eccentricity. This was a deliberate, focused pursuit. Most of it was illegible to me. Sprawling notes in a script I didn't recognize. Diagrams that looked like constellations but were clearly not. Then, tucked beneath a stack of brittle maps, I found it. A small, leather-bound journal. its cover worn smooth from handling. No title, no author, just the stark, unyielding leather. I flipped it open, the pages stiff and yellowed. My great-aunt's handwriting, usually so precise on the few letters I'd received, was different here. Hurried, almost frantic in places, with words underlined multiple times. The entries weren't dated, but they seemed to chronicle a gradual descent. It watches from the corners. The weight of sorrow is a feast. It fattens on despair. The warding fails. My strength wanes. It strains against the chains. My breath hitched. Warding? Chains? My mind scrambled for a logical explanation. Senility, perhaps? A vivid imagination? Yet, the words resonated with the creeping unease I'd felt since stepping foot in the house. I tried to dismiss the growing knot in my stomach, the sensation of unseen eyes on my back. I continued to read, each entry a small prick of ice under my skin. She spoke of the hunger, of the one who listens, always in hushed, almost reverent tones. She described strange currents of cold air, the manipulation of shadows, the slow erosion of hope. It was all there, everything I'd been experiencing, laid bare in her trembling script. A sudden, sharp crack from the hallway made me jump, the journal slipping from my grasp and thudding against the desk. Nothing. Just the house. Settling. I picked up the journal, my hands trembling slightly. My rational mind was screaming for me to stop, to burn the thing, to walk away. But the other part of me, the part that craved answers, urged me on. I needed a break, a moment of mundane normalcy, something to ground me. The laundry room was in the basement, a surprisingly modern addition to the otherwise ancient house. The washing machine and dryer, relics from the 90s, hummed with a comforting, if slightly grating, energy. I tossed in a load of clothes, the mundane task a small anchor in the rising tide of my anxiety. The rhythmic slosh of the water, the low growl of the dryer, it was a balm. Then, the dryer stopped. Not with a click or a whir, but with a sudden deafening cessation of sound. The washing machine, still mid-cycle, also went silent. I stood frozen, listening. It pressed in, thick and palpable. Not the wind, not my imagination. Clear as day, though too faint to make out the words. It was like someone was breathing a secret directly into my ear, a secret meant only for me, and it carried a profound, aching sadness. My skin crawled. Every hair on my arm stood on end. It watches from the corners. I scrambled for the light switch, my fingers fumbling. The fluorescent tube flickered, then burst to life, bathing the room in a harsh, unforgiving glare. The corner was empty. Just the piled linens. I backed out of the laundry room, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs, the mundane task of washing clothes utterly forgotten. A hungry, ancient presence, finally free to listen. And I was, terrifyingly, its new audience. The journal lay open on the dusty desk. Those stark words, warding, chains, the listener, burned into my vision. My breath still hitched, a raw knot tightening in my stomach. Senility? A cruel joke from a mind unraveling? But the house, Blackwood House, had been a repository of unease since the moment I stepped over its threshold. The air felt heavy, pregnant with unspoken things, and the sensation of unseen eyes, a prickling on my nape, had become a constant companion. I pushed away from the desk, the old chair groaning in protest, the sound too loud in the sudden silence of the study. A legacy she'd written, a legacy of dread. The house seemed to swallow the light whole. I walked through the hall, my footsteps echoing on the bare floorboards. I stopped, my head tilting. No drafts, no obvious cause. But the sound was too precise, too present. It wasn't a random pop or snap. It sounded like something heavy shifting its weight. I continued into the kitchen, intending to make some tea, anything to anchor myself to the mundane. As I reached for the kettle, a cabinet door, one I knew I'd latched tightly after finding an old tin of biscuits that morning, slowly swung open. Not a violent lurch, but a smooth, deliberate arc, as if guided by an invisible hand. My own hand froze mid-air. I stared at the empty space inside the cabinet, then at the door, still swaying gently on its hinges. This wasn't a draft. This wasn't the house settling. I slammed the cabinet door shut, the bang reverberating through the silent kitchen. The bravado was a flimsy shield. I grabbed the kettle, my fingers fumbling, and filled it with water, the mundane task a desperate attempt at normalcy. I decided to tackle the laundry. The laundry room with humming machines was in the basement, a space I'd only briefly explored. 2 industrial-sized washing machines and a dryer hummed steadily, their combined drone a low, persistent thrum that vibrated through the concrete floor. The air here was warm and damp, smelling faintly of mildew and bleach. The rhythmic slosh and spin began, a comforting, if loud, counterpoint to my frayed nerves. I leaned against the dryer, watching the towels tumble through the soapy water. The sound of the machines was a thick curtain, muffling everything else. Or so I thought. A faint scratching, like fingernails on wood, coming from behind the dryer. It wasn't loud, almost swallowed by the machinery, but it was insistent. Scratch, scratch, pause, scratch. My eyes darted to the space between the dryer and the wall. Too narrow for anything substantial, just dust bunnies and forgotten lint. The scratching stopped abruptly. The only sound was the whirring of the washer. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding thin, ridiculous in the noisy room. No answer. Of course not. An old house, plenty of places for rodents to nest. But the thought offered little comfort. The scratching had been too deliberate, too rhythmic. Not the random scurrying of a mouse. Then a flicker. The fluorescent light above me, a long buzzing tube, dimmed for a split second, then returned to full brightness. It did it again. And again. The humming of the machines seemed to intensify, rising in pitch, a high-pitched whine that grated on my ears. The air grew heavy, the dampness suddenly cloying. My breath caught in my throat. I backed away from the dryer, my gaze fixed on the light, then on the narrow gap against the wall. The machine's whine rose to a piercing shriek, making my teeth ache. It felt like the very air was being stretched taut, ready to snap. I clamped my hands over my ears, wincing at the unbearable noise. And then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The machines returned to their normal, steady hum. The light steadied. The scratching was gone. The laundry room, for all its humming, was silent save for the wash cycle. I stood there, trembling, the echo of the shriek still ringing in my ears. This wasn't just my imagination anymore. This wasn't the house settling. This was something active, something responding. They looked like moving boxes, water-stained and brittle with age. I walked over, my legs still feeling like jelly, and knelt down. The top box was labeled, in faded ink, Miska papers. Blackwood. With trembling fingers, I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled amongst dried leaves and moth-eaten fabric, was a collection of yellowed newspaper clippings. Their edges crumbled as I carefully picked one up. Unexplained endings, all tied to this very house. The names changed, the dates shifted, but the undercurrent of sorrow remained constant. My great-aunt wasn't the first to grapple with Blackwood House's malevolent history. She wasn't the first one to live here and experience tragedy. And if her journal was to be believed, she hadn't just experienced it. He had been fighting it. The listener. It fed on grief and isolation. And Blackwood House, it seemed, had been a buffet for generations. A ward. And now, I was next. It was making its presence known. Directly, aggressively. It was hungry. And I was alone. My great-aunt wasn't the first to grapple with Blackwood House's malevolence. The realization hit me like a physical blow, even though the air in the study remained still, thick with the scent of ancient paper and dust. These brittle newspaper clippings, carefully preserved, painted a picture of a repeating tragedy, a cycle of sorrow rooted in these very walls. And now, I was here. A shiver, not of cold, but of creeping dread, traced its way down my spine. I pushed away from the desk, needing to move, to break the suffocating silence of the study. My eyes fell on my clothes, still in the suitcase, now smelling vaguely of old fabric and the journey here. A mundane task, laundry, suddenly seemed like a necessary anchor to the normal world, a way to reclaim some semblance of control. The fluorescent light, when I flicked the switch, sputtered to life with a buzzing cough, casting a sickly yellow glow over the space. A dryer, equally antique, sat opposite, its vent pipe snaking upwards into a grimy, cobwebbed corner. The air was thick with the scent of stale detergent and something else. A faint, almost imperceptible sweetness that didn't belong. As I reached for the detergent, my hand brushed against the wall behind the humming washing machine. My fingers traced a slight indentation, an irregularity in the otherwise uniform surface. It was a symbol, crudely drawn but unmistakable. A circle bisected by a jagged line, with 3 smaller circles forming a triangular pattern around it. It wasn't just decorative, it was familiar. I'd seen it before, or something very much like it, in one of my great-aunt's more esoteric journals in the study. A warding symbol, if I remembered correctly, intended to repel something, or to contain it. My heart gave a nervous lurch. Why would a warding symbol be etched into the wall of the laundry room? Was it meant to protect this space? Or was it a signpost? My gaze flickered around the room, searching. The symbol wasn't alone. Another, almost identical, was barely visible beneath a thick layer of grime on the floor, directly in front of the humming machine. It was pointing towards the back wall, where the concrete met an ancient, rough-hewn stone foundation. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a laundry room. Back upstairs, I returned to the study, my mind racing. I pulled out more of my great-aunt's research, scattering pages across the mahogany desk. I skimmed through her meticulous, almost obsessive notes. The ink faded in places, her handwriting elegant yet sometimes frantic. Pages filled with diagrams of celestial bodies I didn't recognize, strange script, and more symbols. There it was again, the exact symbol from the laundry room wall, sketched in the margin of a page filled with dense, almost indecipherable text. The listener. That was it. That was what the articles implied, what the pervasive sadness in the house suggested. As I read further, a pattern emerged. My great-aunt's notes detailed methods of containment, of binding and warding against this entity. She wrote of feeding it the echoes, not the source, of maintaining the boundaries. She wasn't just living here. He was working here. Her life was a constant struggle to keep something at bay. The symbols, the strange rituals, the isolation, it all clicked into place. She hadn't just inherited the house. He had inherited its burden. Then, buried deep within a stack of papers, I found a single unmarked parchment. It wasn't a journal entry or a research note. It was a map, crudely drawn but precise, of Blackwood House. My finger traced the familiar layout until it stopped at a section of the library, a wall I knew well, lined with heavy oak shelves. But on the map, behind those shelves, was a section marked with the same warding symbol. And next to it, a single word, scrawled in my great-aunt's shaky hand. Sanctum. My breath hitched. A hidden room. A sanctum. Dedicated to what? To the listener? Or to its containment? I walked slowly into the library, my eyes fixed on the towering wall of books. I ran my hand along the spines, the rough texture of ancient leather and aged paper. I pushed, pulled, tapped. Nothing. The wall felt solid, unyielding, but the map was clear. It showed a small, almost invisible mechanism. A specific book, perhaps, or a loose panel. My fingers ran over the spines again, this time with purpose, searching for any anomaly. And then I found it. A book. Its title faded to illegibility, but its spine bore a small, almost microscopic triangular indentation. It was barely noticeable, nestled between two much larger tomes. My fingers closed around it. With a deep breath, I pulled. The book slid out with surprising ease. I pressed it. A low, grinding groan echoed through the library, not from the house itself, but from within the wall. Slowly, with a deep, resonant rumble, a section of the bookshelf, perhaps 10 feet wide, began to recede inwards, then swing open like a heavy door, revealing a narrow, unlit passage beyond. It was the scent of forgotten things, of something ancient and hungry. This was it. The sanctum. The truth. And I had a terrible feeling that the truth would be far worse than anything I could have imagined. The brittle newspaper clippings still lay scattered across the great-aunt's desk, each headline a chilling echo from the past. It wasn't just my great-aunt. This house, this thing, had a history far older, far more entrenched than I'd ever imagined. The realization solidified my resolve. Fear was a given, but a new kind of determination, cold and sharp, had begun to set in. I wasn't just a victim. I was now, whether I liked it or not, a researcher. I spent the next few hours poring over her journals again, not for the first time, but with new eyes. The air in the study grew heavy, not just with dust, but with a palpable pressure, as if the very walls were leaning in, listening to my thoughts. A sudden, sharp crack from the ceiling made me jump, the sound echoing unnaturally long. It was the house, I knew, shifting, or perhaps something within it reacting to my unwelcome scrutiny. The more I delved, the more a single recurring image began to surface in the margins of her notes. A stylized eye, elongated and lidless, always paired with a spiral. Was it a representation of the listener, or a ward against it? The ambiguity gnawed at me. I knew I couldn't do this alone. My great-aunt's writings were a labyrinth. I needed an outside perspective, someone who might understand the esoteric references, the folklore of entities that consumed sorrow. I thought of a name, Professor Eldridge, a retired scholar of forgotten religions and ancient cults, whose work I'd stumbled upon in a dusty library once. He was known for his skepticism, but also for his encyclopedic knowledge of the obscure. He seemed like the least dangerous option. Finding his contact information took an age, buried deep in academic archives online. When I finally located an email address, my fingers hesitated over the keyboard. What would I even say? "Hello, Professor. I've inherited a house haunted by an entity that feeds on grief, and I think my great-aunt was its warden?" It sounded insane, but the alternative was to remain isolated, alone with a growing, unseen predator. I drafted a careful, vague email, omitting the more fantastic details. I spoke of unusual historical artifacts and cryptic family journals related to local folklore. It was a sanitized academic appeal for guidance. Hours later, an automated reply from Professor Eldridge's university account informed me he was on sabbatical, unreachable until further notice. A dead end. The house seemed to breathe a sigh around me, a long, drawn-out exhalation of satisfaction. Not the subtle, almost imagined sounds from before, but distinct, sibilant voices, just at the edge of hearing. They weren't words I could discern, but the tone was unmistakable. A chorus of sorrow, of loss, of utter abject despair. It wasn't just one voice. It was many, a symphony of suffering. I clamped my hands over my ears, but the sound seemed to bypass them, resonating directly inside my skull. Laundry, that was it. A simple domestic task. I pushed open the heavy wooden door to the laundry room with humming machines. The low thrum of the ancient washing machine and dryer both still functional, was a welcome, if slightly eerie sound. It was an industrial drone, a mechanical heartbeat that, for a moment, offered a semblance of normalcy. But even here, the entity found me. I snatched my hand back, my breath catching in my throat. Nothing was there, just the empty space between the clothes. Then, a flicker. In the reflection of the polished metal dryer door, I saw it. And within that distortion, for the briefest, most horrifying instant, I saw her. My great aunt. Her mouth was open in a silent scream, her hands clasped over her ears, exactly as mine had been moments before. She looked terrified, trapped, completely consumed. The vision lasted only a fraction of a second, then vanished, leaving only my own distorted reflection staring back, wide-eyed and pale. She hadn't just been a warden. He had been a victim too, slowly consumed by the very thing she tried to contain. And now the entity was showing me my own future, a mirror of her agony. I was next. The realization solidified not as a fear, but as a burning, desperate need to break this cycle. I wouldn't let it happen. I couldn't. It wasn't just a coincidence, not a string of unfortunate events. This house, this thing within it, had been doing this for a long, long time. And my great aunt, the enigmatic warden, had known. She hadn't been trying to escape it. She'd been trying to contain it. And she'd failed. A cold dread seeped into my bones, a different kind of chill than the house usually offered. The listener wasn't some static haunting. It was an active predator, and I was the next one on its menu. The thought curdled in my stomach, making the stale air taste like ash. I needed to get away from the desk, away from the damning evidence. Chores. Yes, chores. I gathered a load of dirty clothes, my hands trembling slightly as I pulled them from the hamper in the master bedroom. I made my way down to the basement, the old stairs groaning under my weight, each creak sounding like a sigh. The rhythmic thrum of the ancient washer and dryer, a low, steady drone, was usually a comfort. A sign of life, of functionality in this decaying monument. But today, it felt different. The humming seemed to carry a subtle undertone, a faint, almost imperceptible vibration that resonated deep within my chest. I loaded the washer, the heavy drum clunking shut. The water rushed in, a gurgling, sucking sound that seemed too loud, too insistent. I leaned against the dryer, watching the clothes tumble in the other machine, a blur of muted colors behind the thick glass. For a moment, the mundane routine almost worked its magic. Then the humming shifted. It wasn't louder, but it felt closer, as if the sound wasn't coming from the machines at all, but from inside my head. It wasn't a word, not exactly, but a suggestion of one. A breathy intake of sound that made the hairs on my arm stand on end. I spun around, my heart hammering against my ribs, but there was nothing. Just the dusty concrete walls, the flickering bare bulb, and the relentless drone of the machines. The house was no longer just a place I inhabited. It was a cage, and the bars were closing in. That night, sleep offered no escape. My dreams were a kaleidoscope of fractured memories and distorted fears. I was back in my old apartment, but the walls were peeling, the air thick with the same metallic scent from the Blackwood House basement. My great aunt stood in the corner, her face a mask of grief, her eyes wide and pleading. She wasn't speaking, but I understood her message. You're next. Then the scene shifted. My failed business venture, the argument with my estranged father, the choices I'd made that led me here, to this desolate place. The voices twisted these moments, painting them as inevitable failures, proof of my inherent weakness, my utter inadequacy. You deserve this, a voice hissed, not in my ear, but directly into the core of my being. You always fail. You always end up alone. The words weren't just spoken, they were felt. searing through me with the intensity of a physical blow. I thrashed, trying to break free, but the dream held me fast. It was cultivating it, nurturing it, like a farmer tending a crop. I woke with a choked gasp, drenched in sweat, the taste of fear like copper on my tongue. It was in my head, weaving its insidious tendrils into the very fabric of my thoughts, actively shaping my reality, twisting my memories, and preying on every insecurity I possessed. It was no longer just observing. It was creating the despair it craved. And it was just getting started. The void pressed in, a suffocating blanket of nothingness, and the whispers, a frantic, accusing chorus burrowed into my skull. Worthless, alone, deserving. They pulsed with the rhythm of a frantic, dying heart, each word a spike driven deeper. I thrashed, a desperate silent scream tearing at my throat, but there was no breaking free. I could feel the rough weave of the blanket against my cheek, the stale, cold air of the bedroom. My eyes snapped open, a gasp catching in my lungs. The room was dark, but not the inky black of the void. I pushed myself up, the sheets tangling around my legs like grasping tendrils. The entity. It wasn't just in my dreams. It was in my waking moments, too. It was here, in the house, feeding, on my fear, on my despair. This was it. I couldn't just sit here waiting to be consumed. I had to get out, now. I stumbled out of bed, my bare feet hitting the cold floorboards with a dull thud. The house felt different, heavier than it had before. I moved through the hallway, my eyes darting, listening to the creaks and groans of the ancient structure. My first thought was the front door. I remembered trying it before, finding it locked, but a fresh surge of adrenaline propelled me. Maybe I could break it. Maybe I could smash a window. Anything. I reached the grand entrance hall, the moonlight filtering weakly through the grimy panes of the transom window above the door. I grabbed the heavy brass knob, twisting it with all my might. It didn't budge. I put my shoulder into the thick oak, pushing, grunting, feeling the splintering wood under my palm. Nothing. The door was as solid as the foundation of the house itself. Panic began to claw at my throat. I backed away, surveying the enormous leaded glass windows flanking the door. They were old, but impossibly thick, reinforced with intricate ironwork that looked more decorative than structural. I swung it, a wild, desperate arc, aiming for the largest pane. The impact was jarring. The poker bounced off the glass with a dull thunk, leaving not even a scratch. My hands vibrated with the shock. I stared, disbelieving. This wasn't just old glass. This was something else. It was reinforced. Or perhaps not just glass at all. My reflection stared back, distorted and pale. A ghost of myself. The house wasn't just old. It was actively resisting me. It was a prison, and it was alive. I moved through the ground floor, a frantic scavenger. The kitchen, the parlor, the library. Every window I checked, every door I tried, yielded the same result. Sealed. Immovable. It was like the very fabric of the house had tightened, closing around me. The back door, which I distinctly remembered being just a simple wooden latch, was now flush with the wall. No seam, no handle. Just solid wood that seemed to merge seamlessly with the frame. It was a physical impossibility, a trick of the eye, yet undeniably real. My breathing grew ragged, each exhalation a shallow gasp. My limbs felt heavy, my movements sluggish. The exhaustion that had begun in my dream was now a physical weight, pressing me down. My mind, usually sharp, felt clouded, fuzzy at the edges. I was losing myself, piece by agonizing piece. Then I heard it. It wasn't the house settling, it was mechanical. I followed it, stumbling down a narrow servant's stairwell I hadn't properly explored before. The air grew damp and cool, smelling faintly of bleach and something metallic. Two enormous industrial-grade washing machines and a dryer pulsed with a rhythmic thrumming, their metal casings vibrating. They were running, empty, churning nothing but air and water, a pointless, relentless cycle. The sound was deafening down here, a low, guttural roar that seemed to vibrate in my very bones. It was hypnotic, maddening. I scanned the room, desperate for anything useful. A wrench, a crowbar, anything to pry open a vent, break a pipe, find a weakness. But there was nothing. Just shelves of detergents, neatly stacked towels, and the relentless, meaningless hum. The machines were bolted to the concrete floor, immovable titans. Even the small, grimy window high on the wall was barred, the iron thick and rusted, impenetrable. The futility of it all washed over me, a tidal wave of despair. My shoulders slumped. My legs threatened to give out. The entity wasn't just feeding on my fear, it was orchestrating my decline. Every thwarted attempt, every locked door, every impossible barrier was a carefully crafted step in its plan to break me. It wanted me to give up. And I was so tired, so close to breaking. Just the oppressive heavy dark of Blackwood House before dawn. Ancient. And then the suffocating press of an unseen weight. It wasn't just the memory of the dream, it was it, the listener. Closer now, its hunger a palpable thing in the pre-dawn gloom. No, not today. I wasn't going to let it win, not yet. A surge of defiant energy fueled by pure, unadulterated fear propelled me out of bed. I needed light, and I needed answers. My great-aunt's journals, scattered across the study, held the key. I was certain of it now. She hadn't just been researching some obscure entity out of academic curiosity. He had been fighting it. Or worse, he had been serving it. The study, when I reached it, offered little comfort. I snatched up the thickest, most heavily annotated journal, its leather cover cracked and brittle. The pages were a chaotic tapestry of frantic scribbles, arcane symbols, and faded drawings. My great-aunt's elegant script had devolved into a desperate scrawl in later entries. I needed a place where I could think, where the house's oppressive silence wasn't quite so absolute. A place with a different kind of noise, a mundane hum to anchor me. I knew just the spot. The laundry room with humming machines. 2 industrial-sized washers and a dryer, relics from a bygone era, churned and rumbled with a constant droning rhythm. They were ancient, but still functional, a testament to the house's stubborn refusal to fully decay. The machines vibrated the concrete floor, a low thrum that was both irritating and strangely comforting. A wall of sound against the insidious quiet of the house. I pulled up a rickety wooden stool, its legs groaning under my weight, and set the journal on a nearby utility table, its surface scarred with rust. I began to read, meticulously, slowly, trying to filter out the relentless hum of the machines, trying to filter out the growing unease. My great-aunt's early entries detailed her initial fascination, her belief that he was on the cusp of a groundbreaking discovery. She spoke of the listener as an ancient entity, a primordial hunger. But then the tone shifted. The academic detachment fractured. It feeds on the echoes of despair, the reverberations of loss. One entry read, the ink smudged as if she'd been crying. It does not devour the body, but the spirit. This was what I had been feeling. The creeping apathy, the deepening despair. It was feeding on me. I turned the page, my fingers brushing against dried, crystalline residue. Salt, I realized, looking closer. There were sketches of intricate sigils, patterns that seemed to writhe on the page, and long, rambling passages about warding, appeasement, and the great stillness. Then I found it. A series of entries dated years apart, each more desperate than the last. She wasn't just researching, he was combating. The wards weaken, its hunger grows. I have given it much, but it demands more. The sacrifice must be made, not of blood, but of essence. Only then will it be sated. Only then will it return to its slumber. My great-aunt wasn't a researcher. He was a warden. He had been the one containing the listener, offering up her own grief, her own isolation, as a constant slow meal, keeping it pacified, keeping it from breaking free and devouring everything. Her eccentricities, her reclusiveness, her profound sadness. It wasn't just her personality. It was her duty, her purpose. And now he was gone. And I, Cole, was its new target. My gaze fell upon a particularly dense section, underlined multiple times, almost torn from the binding. It detailed a ritual, not of destruction, but of transference. But the cost. The new warden must be willing, must accept the burden, must offer the deepest well of their own sorrow, their own loneliness, to become the vessel, the prison. The house will be their tomb, their life, the lock. This is the only way to ensure its dormancy. People beyond these walls. He had been protecting the world, and the only way to continue that protection was to take her place, to become the next warden, to live out my days in this decaying manner, feeding my despair to the listener, willingly becoming its keeper, its prisoner. My life, my future, my very essence, slowly devoured to keep it contained. My vision blurred, not from tears, but from the sheer crushing weight of the truth. This wasn't a legacy of wealth or history, to me, and the immense sacrifice wasn't just a possibility, it was the only way. I understood now. Every agonizing detail. And the listener, I could feel it, stirring in the depths of the house, its hunger sharpening, anticipating my decision. The realization had settled over me like a shroud woven from the house's own dust and gloom. I was to be the next warden. The thought of living out my days, feeding my despair to the listener, trapped in this decaying manner, was a bitter, suffocating pill. But then, a sliver of something sharp and unyielding cut through the gloom. Defiance. I wouldn't just succumb to being its warden. If I was to inherit this curse, I would do it on my own terms. I wasn't going to be its meal. I was going to be its keeper. The old journals scattered across the study floor suddenly held new meaning. My great-aunt's frantic scrawls, her obscure glyphs and half-finished rituals weren't just the ramblings of a madwoman. They were a battle plan. I scanned them, my eyes darting over faded ink, searching for a weapon, a shield, anything that could turn the tide. The listener fed on grief and isolation, yes, but it bound itself to a place, to a person, through a powerful, unwavering will. My great-aunt's despair had made her vulnerable, but her will had been the cage. If I could project a will stronger than its hunger, perhaps I could become not just its prison, but its master. A particular passage leaped out at me, underlined repeatedly. It seeks the hollow, but it fears the anchor. Give it nothing it desires, but offer it a promise it cannot refuse. What promise? What anchor? My gaze drifted from the page to the house itself, the old timbers groaning around me. Where would I find it? Where would I make my stand? A faint rhythmic thudding, a low persistent hum, pulsed up through the floorboards. The sound had been a constant background noise since I'd arrived, easily ignored. But now it called to me. The laundry room. I descended the servants' staircase, each step creaking a protest. When I pushed open the heavy wooden door, the sound intensified, washing over me. The laundry room with humming machines was a cavernous space, tiled in a sickly green that had long since lost its luster. 2 industrial-sized washing machines and a colossal dryer churned away, their steel drums glinting under a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. Water gurgled through pipes snaking along the walls, and the air was thick with the scent of stale detergent and a pervasive earthy mildew. The rhythmic thump-thump-thump of the dryer was hypnotic. a counterpoint to the low, steady drone of the washers. Condensation beaded on the cold metal surfaces, mirroring the sweat that had begun to prickle my skin. This was it. The place felt charged. The shadows here seemed deeper, clinging to the corners of the room like waiting beasts. "You're here, aren't you?" I whispered, my voice thin against the mechanical roar. "You are alone. You are lost. You have nothing." My great-aunt's words echoed in my mind. Give it nothing it desires. It desired my despair. I wouldn't give it any of that. I clenched my fists, digging my fingernails into my palms. But I pushed back. "You are weak. You are broken. You are mine." "No," I countered, my voice firm, unwavering. "I am not. I am an anchor." I took a deep breath, letting the stale, damp air fill my lungs. This was the moment. The self-sacrifice wasn't my life, or my sanity, or my despair. It was my freedom. My future outside these walls. I was choosing this. Choosing the burden. Choosing to become the warden, not because I was forced, but because I would. "I accept this house," I declared, my voice ringing with a conviction that surprised even me. "I accept its history. I accept its purpose. You will feed on my will. My unwavering, unyielding will to keep you contained. To keep you here." The effect was immediate and violent. The humming machines faltered, sputtered, and then surged, their thrumming becoming a furious, deafening throb that vibrated through the very floor. But I stood my ground. My will was a wall, unbreachable. I wasn't offering it despair. I was offering it a cage built of my own determination. A promise it could not refuse. The promise of eternal containment, powered by the very force it sought to consume. The shriek faded, slowly, agonizingly, until it was nothing more than a faint hiss, like air escaping a punctured tire. The machines, still humming, sounded mechanical once more, their thudding rhythm settling back into a mundane background noise. The listener was not destroyed. It was not banished to some other plane, but it was contained. For now, I had become the warden. And in that choice, I had found a power I never knew I possessed. The house was still a prison, yes, but now I held the keys. The thrumming, a furious, deafening throb that vibrated through the very marrow of my bones, didn't just fade. It snapped. It was like a taut wire, stretched to its absolute limit, suddenly shearing apart. The silence that followed wasn't merely the absence of sound. It was a physical blow, a vacuum that sucked the air from my lungs and left my eardrums screaming with phantom echoes. I stumbled, my knees giving way, collapsing onto the grimy concrete floor of the laundry room with humming machines. My head swam, a kaleidoscope of pain and disorientation. The metallic tang of ozone, thick and acrid, assaulted my nostrils, mingling with the faint, unsettling scent of something burnt. Not wood, not fabric, but something deeper, more elemental, like scorched earth or superheated stone. I lay there, cheek pressed against the cool, rough floor, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Every muscle in my body screamed, a dull ache that seemed to emanate from my very bones. My vision blurred, tears of exhaustion and strain stinging my eyes. The whispers, the insidious chorus that had tormented me, were gone, vanished. The air, which moments ago had crackled with malevolent energy, now felt merely stale, heavy with dust and the ghosts of forgotten chores. The humming machines, those ancient, tireless sentinels, were still. Completely, utterly silent. They looked like forgotten relics, hulking metal carcasses in the dim light filtering through the high, grimy windows. My head throbbed, a relentless drumbeat behind my eyes. It was over. Or at least, the immediate assault was. My gaze drifted to the contraption I had so desperately activated. The complex array of wires, crystals, and what I now understood to be wards, designed by my great-aunt. It looked inert, some of the wires frayed, a couple of the crystals cracked, but intact. It hadn't exploded, hadn't vaporized. It had simply worked. And in working, it had driven something back. Not destroyed, no. Nothing that old, that pervasive, could be truly destroyed. Only contained. Only pushed away for a time. The pervasive sense of being watched, of being hunted, had receded. It was replaced by something else, something far more insidious, a profound, aching emptiness. I made my way to the hidden room, my heart a dull thud against my ribs. The door, which had once felt like a portal to damnation, now hung slightly ajar, as if exhausted. Inside, the altar was undisturbed, the strange symbols etched into its surface still glowing faintly in the dim light. My great-aunt's journals lay scattered on the floor where I had left them, their pages filled with frantic scrawl, now seeming less like madness and more like a desperate, lonely chronicle of a life spent on the front lines of an unseen war. I picked one up, my fingers tracing her elegant yet trembling handwriting. I understood now. Every cryptic entry, every warning, every desperate attempt to understand the entity she called the listener. She hadn't been an eccentric recluse. He had been a sentinel, a warden, sacrificing her life to keep this thing at bay. The entity was still here. It hadn't left. It had simply retreated, nursing its wounds, gathering its strength, waiting. And I, by surviving, by activating the ward, had inadvertently stepped into her role. The legacy wasn't just the house. It was the burden, the responsibility, the unending silent vigil. I wandered through the manor, a ghost in my own inheritance. The grand, decaying rooms, once filled with the promise of a fresh start, now felt like the opulent chambers of a tomb. The silence stretched, vast and oppressive. I could leave. I could walk out the front door, get in my car, and drive away, never looking back. The thought was intoxicating, a siren song of freedom. Would it truly be free? Would the listener, once unchained, simply remain here? Or would it follow? Would it seek me out, its hunger for grief and despair now sharper, honed by its temporary defeat? And what then? Would I condemn some other unsuspecting soul to this fate? The thought was a bitter taste in my mouth. My great-aunt had carried this burden alone, in isolation, driven by a sense of duty I was only now beginning to comprehend. He had protected the world, or at least her corner of it, from something ancient and terrible. Could I, knowing what I knew, simply abandon it? The alternative, destroying the house, flickered in my mind like a desperate, vengeful flame. Set it ablaze. Let the old timber burn. Let the stones crumble to dust. But even that felt like a futile gesture. The entity wasn't bound to the physical structure. It was bound to the place, to the ley lines, to the very concept of sorrow and isolation that had seeped into the ground itself. Burning the house might only release it, unmoored, to drift like a poisonous fog across the land, seeking new vessels, new wells of despair. No. I looked out a tall, arched window at the overgrown grounds, the ancient, twisted trees of Blackwood House. The man who had arrived here weeks ago, hopeful and naive, was gone. Replaced by this weary sentinel, this unwilling guardian. The horror hadn't ended. It had merely changed. It was no longer a frantic external assault, but an internal gnawing certainty. I was marked, irrevocably. My life, from this moment forward, would be a quiet, solitary vigil. I would learn my great-aunt's methods, her wards, her rituals. I would live in this house, contain this entity until my last breath. The thought was not one of heroism, but of profound, crushing resignation. This was my legacy now. The listener was still here, always listening. And I, Cole, was its new warden, forever bound.